Your Excellency, thank you again very much for having come today and delivered an excellent lecture and having a very thought-provoking discussion that followed. I'd like to ask you a few questions now, just to follow up on your lecture. This conference, we're looking for the most part at Africa and also the African diaspora, where we see a huge potential actually for greater engagement, very often of the diaspora. As you know, the population of the diaspora is actually larger than the population of the African continent. And in that sense, it seems as if there's a potential also where the diaspora can do even more, also to help ensure this rise of Africa, so to speak. So my first question is, what role do you see for the African diaspora in actually assuring the success of Africa as a continent?
First of all, we realize the importance of African diaspora, and in countries like mine, Uganda, we have tried to encourage them to form associations wherever they are, and then interest them to come back to Uganda and participate in the development. Like in America, we have Uganda North American Association, very strong. And believe me or not, now the remittances, the money they send to back home, is now threatening to be one of the leading sources of revenue for the country. And they are increasingly coming back with their skills to invest. So all we have to do is to reach out for them, wherever they are, and try to interest them in coming back home. They have a big role to play. Some of them have acquired skills which we don't have, and which are especially needed in our developing countries.
All right, my next question has to do with the role of culture. You have had a very extensive diplomatic career, serving in your own country in the context of the United Nations, now here in Germany. There seem to be three pillars when it comes to culture, diplomacy: the political, and the economic, and the culture. I just wanted to ask you, what relevance do you think the cultural element has, or is there a greater potential, for let's say the diplomatic efforts of Uganda and beyond? What role does culture play?
I think culture plays a very important role. Even in diplomacy, because if you have to promote understanding between people, then you have to concentrate on the culture, understand their cultures, because that is where human interaction takes place. So to be successful as a country or in the diplomatic world, I think culture is one of the pillars you have to emphasize and dwell on. And it's very, very important too.
Could you give maybe one example where you've seen cultural diplomacy or something cultural succeed at actually bringing people together? Very often we say what's great about, let's say, the arts or music. Sometimes there's a possibility to transcend borders, that you can actually bring people together through sports or through art or through music in a way that sometimes is difficult in the economic or the political sphere. I wonder if you could tell me maybe one example from Uganda or even Africa as a whole where you saw actually culture or cultural diplomacy have a positive impact.
I'll give you an example of music performances. We have had some cultural troupes which have come in countries like Europe and elsewhere and performed. And you could judge by the attendance, record attendance at these concerts, and where people of different faiths, backgrounds, they are just united by that music. And it's wonderful to see them together. So if really, that's a good example of culture, one event. Another one is in the games, like football. If you promote football, you could see what happened in the World Cup. I think by mere holding World Cup in Africa, how it galvanized the whole world to focus on Africa. Again, it's an example of a cultural instrument, using games as a tool.
That's interesting. That leads me to my next question too. Cultural diplomacy is very often defined by nations. So there's, let's say, Uganda cultural diplomacy, German cultural diplomacy, American cultural diplomacy. It seems as if there's an interesting opportunity, however, if we move it to the regional level. You were just giving the example of the World Cup, where that was for Africa. It wasn't just for South Africa. What are your thoughts there in the sense, would there be a possibility, let's say, of having an African cultural diplomacy? For example, during the Cold War, America had the America House in Germany. There were these different America houses representing America culture. Could we conceive of something maybe like an Africa House? Would that be a benefit, you think, for a country like Uganda, or a disadvantage? In the sense, that would be one building that maybe would lead to confusion. People would think, Africa is one country. Or could that be a benefit, actually, giving maybe more of a stage and a voice to smaller countries within Africa? How do you feel about that? In the sense, cultural diplomacy, should it remain country by country, or would there be a benefit to have some sort of a regional cultural diplomacy for Africa, for example?
I think it can be both. It can be an individual country engagement, or it can be also a group of countries coming together. The advantage is, of course, if it is promoted on a multilateral, say, level, it becomes more successful. And I think in this promotion, governments have a role. If you can have, as we do in Uganda, a whole ministry of culture, and if it's replicated elsewhere, so that now government can focus on this and see how they can promote it globally, I think it would be important. And then they could have an institution or organization in Europe or America, where they can, like an opera house, where they could come and show this collective culture.
All right, my last question to you is about tourism, in the sense we've noticed a wonderful potential very often with tourism to actually also have cultural diplomacy take place within. Sometimes it can be the opposite. For example, Kenya, I think very often there's the strategy of sort of this mass tourism, where people will come, very low prices, sort of all-inclusive, etc. Tanzania, on the other hand, has a very different approach to tourism. It's much more limited, tends to be more expensive, etc. And again, there's more attention very often paid to sort of details, etc. What is the strategy, let's say, of Uganda when it comes to tourism, and can cultural diplomacy be a part of the tourism industry within Uganda?
When it comes to tourism and with relation to cultural diplomacy, yes, we have cultural sites, for instance, in Uganda, like the former burial place of the kings, which have been preserved, where people can go and visit. Then we have what we call community tourism, and that is where you observe how different communities live, how their cultures are. And so I think culture would be a very important part of promotion of tourism. It's to see how people live. And I think if you take the popular notion of tourism, going to beaches or going to, I think these are oversold sites, and you need to have something unique, unique to stand out from others. And that's why, for instance, in Uganda, we just want to develop a niche, small, unique, like going to see gorillas, for instance, like promoting community tourism, see how people live. I think these are aspects which would be unique and attract people from, say, Europe. You can go to and watch games everywhere, but you must wildlife. You can go to the beaches anywhere, but you have to go something different, and that's what we are trying to do.
That's true, and I think through tourism that can sometimes be the first experience also that many will have, hopefully then leading to a cultural diplomacy experience. And I think what's powerful about tourism is the ability to get to know the other culture, but also to get to know yourself. And I think that can be the wonderful potential there. So thank you very much for your time for the lecture today, and also for the discussion that followed, as well as for the interview. It was an honor and a pleasure to have you here, and we look forward to collaborating with the embassy, and perhaps even in the field of tourism and cultural diplomacy we can develop some projects. So thank you. Excellent. Thank you very much, Excellency. Thank you. Wonderful. This is great. So I appreciate your time also. We were longer than we had planned, and I appreciate that.
It's fine. I enjoy it.